Welcome to Audience of One podcast. We hope the stories and testimonies shared by a range of Christian leaders inspire and encourage you to live for an audience of one in every season of life. And if you do not yet have a relationship with God, we hope that these conversations offer meaningful insight into the lives of those who follow Christ. This is Audience of One.
On this episode, we hear from Bree Monahan. Bree is the founder and co-leader of Sunflower Ministries, caring for children with disabilities in northern Uganda. As a heads up, Bree was in Uganda for this interview, so apologies for any scratchy audio.
So good to say hello, Bree, and to see you in person. For those of you listening, you're in for an engaging and incredible time with us. Bree, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are and what you're up to right now?
Sure. Well, I'm Bree Monahan. I come from country Victoria. Shout out to all those near Geelong. That's where I grew up. And I came and lived in Melbourne at Q Student Res, and that's kind of where I began my story with the Lord. And I now, 10 years after that time, live in a little town called Arua, which is in the very north of Uganda, right near the border of South Sudan and Congo. And I live here, and I have the absolute privilege of working alongside some wonderful women, both from the States and from Uganda, to love and serve kiddos with disabilities and their families. So, yeah, I guess that's just a little snippet.
So, Bree, you grew up in country Victoria. What was your family of origin like in terms of even, like the church connection and things like that? I heard that you came to know Jesus when you came to the Q Student Res, but what was your spiritual journey like before that?
Yeah, sure. So yes, they're still on a little farm outside of Geelong. And it was wonderful growing up on a farm. You get to explore the world and you learn a lot about life and death and all the things in between when you help animals. And I guess it was a really cool experience to be able to see the world from see how God's creation can grow things and how we can love and care for different beings and animals in the world. My family were not followers of Jesus. They had experiences in the Catholic Church growing up. And so that meant that we kind of had this, I guess, really, they had life that we as children could search for kind of whatever we wanted. And they were so incredible at kind of showing us the example of loving and accepting all different types of people. But maybe we're still grappling themselves with who was the creator of the world. What does it mean? What is the meaning of life? Definitely had some different spirituality opportunities and grew up kind of exploring. And I loved that about my childhood, was kind of getting to hear from different people. And even though we lived in the country, like to have some different opportunities to talk to different people who maybe wouldn't have been accepted in the community in kind of a small town. So it was a wonderful experience, but also was deeply challenging to kind of be searching for this reason for life and this purpose for this time on earth. And it wasn't until I moved to Q Student Res and kind of was talking to people that I kind of started to meet people that were really nice for no reason aside from kind of this Jesus that they talk about. And of course, I'd heard his story a little bit and, knew enough from some snippets of Sunday school lessons that we went to and a couple of things from the Catholic school that I attended in high school. But it wasn't until I kind of started hearing people just in the dining hall starting to unpack this story of this man who was good and who served people and who loved people, which was so enticing to me growing up in a family who did really love people, but maybe didn't necessarily have like a source for that. And so then to kind of find this source in Jesus and this outpouring of his love and reasons why was really cool, and was so drawn to that. And so, yeah, that's kind of a very small portion of how I was able to meet him and learn a little about him.
That is such a good answer. And I think that there was a sense of Q Student Res that there might have been some positive peer pressure going around and getting you along to church and that sort of stuff. Was that your experience there?
Yes. When you live at a student residence next to a church and everybody else is attending church on Sunday afternoon and the music sounds really good flowing in from your dorm room window, you kind of do get a little FOMO. And that's definitely where it all started. Was my friends, I tagged along because I didn't want to be left alone at the residence during church time. And yeah, the rest is history, I guess.
So, Bree, how did you perceive the church, I guess, and Christians before you started going to QBAPS?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting, I guess it's interesting because we all grow up with like these perceptions of different things. And unless you are willing to step into the shoes of the people involved in something, you can really be really misguided by, especially like the secular world and even just the media. And at the time growing up, there was a lot of people and kind of, I guess, in the media and in the legal system that had really taken advantage of maybe their positions as leaders in the church and as people who served God. And so my initial impression of the church and of God was these people that you saw, being convicted of horrible crimes. And, you heard a lot of judgment, and it wasn't necessarily from my family, but from the other external, I was heavily involved in justice and democracy and a lot of protesting in my time. And so there is a very particular culture that can sometimes come there, which is quite wanting to do real good, but can be somewhat skeptical of other institutions. And I think the church was one that I had a lot of skepticism about, that I didn't fully understand. Certainly don't fully understand God or the church, but I definitely have come to a place where I can read the Bible for what the Bible says and understand God from a place of knowing his spirit's inside of me and teaching me, rather than just looking at the models of society or who society deems as being the representatives of Christ, because often we're not the best representatives of Jesus, because he certainly was far more perfect than us. But so, yes, I think my view of the church and of God has changed drastically in my years. And a great lot of that is because of the people I met at Q and their love for him and their love for others. That really does set a beautiful precedent and a good example of how to live. So I'm very grateful for the people at Q at that time.
So you started going to church and the band and music kept you there for a little while. At what point, I suppose, did you start forming your relationship with God? Was it at one moment and you knew you were a Christian and, I have this relationship with God, or was it something that took a while?
Yeah, it was a really slow, steady, I guess, incline to learning who God was and being willing to let go of some of my skepticism and preformed ideas. I think it can be very easy to see Christians as people who are a bit deluded or don't know much about the rest of the world, or kind of a lot of people talk about them just needing a crutch or something to hope in. And I think that's where I started. And as I slowly met people and spoke to people, well-educated, really loving people who worked beyond the borders and beyond like their own individual families to love others, I started seeing God in different aspects of each person. And So it was honestly through other people that I started to think, gosh, the thing that they have in common is the Bible and God, and who is he? And the best way to learn about who God is to read his word. And so I started very skeptically in Genesis and had absolutely no idea what I was reading. And I remember sitting and reading the Bible. I remember reading a psalm and being like, what is this guy David on about? Like, I don't understand. And slowly I kept reading and kept listening to worship music and kept talking to people. And I guess it was just that genuine persistence in seeking. It wasn't anything like overly spiritual, but just bringing my questions to people and to God, and realizing that he was big enough and loving enough to answer my questions. And he so wanted to love me and wanted me to love him that he was willing to meet me exactly where I was at. And I'm forever grateful that he was willing to do that. And it took a lot for me to love him, and I'm so grateful.
So, Bree, obviously you were studying when you came to Q. What's interesting to me is, what did you study then before you got to the place where you are now?
Oh, Mark, I think I studied pretty much something from every faculty at universities. Yep, I definitely went through 4 or 5 universities, tried a few different things. I started with international development, but yes, ended up working and living in Malaysia instead. I'm not sure if I was running away from the obligation to study or not, but I'm grateful for my time there. So, yes.
So you studied international development. I could see how that would lean to you being passionate about overseas mission and aid. What was the turning point for you? Obviously, you're passionate about your faith, but when did you feel called to the mission field?
It's funny because I wouldn't say I necessarily felt a call to the mission field as such. I think missions, it's such an interesting word to me and has so many different connotations. But I do think, when did I feel a call to do the work that God has placed kind of now in my life, was living here. I actually came originally to serve a family, an American family who were living here, who had 2 sons with a disability. I came initially to Uganda for a few months, and I did not want to stay any longer. I came because God asked me to, and because a family needed help. And as I was in this community, I started asking questions about the local children with disabilities. And I'd worked at St. Paul's School in Melbourne for a while, and it was one of the most wonderful experiences of learning through others how to love children with disabilities. And I got the experience and opportunity to go with my friend Hope. We were a similar age, and she'd just finishing studying social work. And so we went out to the villages and met children with disabilities. And it was at that very moment, looking into the eyes of one of these precious children and talking to his parent or his mother about him and how much she was kind of struggling to understand him and love him. It was that moment that my heart broke. And when I sat back and prayed later on, I begged God to send someone to be a part of this little boy's life and to be a part of the community. And I remember that moment of sitting there and not God audibly saying, but just that moment of like, what if that was why I'm here? And it wasn't like this big, like, oh my goodness, I can do all of this moment. But it was just that small, still voice that kind of said like, hey, you have a story. You have a love for these children that I've placed inside of you. And maybe that's a part of this next journey for you. And again, God is very gentle with me, and he moves in beautiful ways to woo me to his desires from my heart. And it took me a while to get to a point where I was willing. And that was, God bringing so many people into my life that were willing to help and willing to push me forward, even when I didn't want to do it. And the idea of being called by God and having a purpose is both exactly what we're looking for and exactly what we don't want, because then we have to do it. And I think that was where I was at, of this, I have to do this now. And it's not that I have to, but that I want to. And submitting to God in that space was really hard for me. And I'm still learning that every day that I live here, to submit to a sovereign God who loves me and who loves what we're doing, but also to be willing to listen to his voice rather than what I want to do. And again, I'm so grateful he's patient with me. But I guess that's where I'm at right now.
Bree, that is so good.
So, Bree, you knew that you were feeling a calling for your life to go to Uganda at that point. Were there any times or any hardships or struggles that came up in that process of going over there that sort of made you doubt, is this God? Is this actually what God wants me to do? And how did you work through that?
Yeah, I think most of that time was a lot of doubt. I think one of the ways that I probably struggle in my faith the most is the doubt in the gifts that God has given me. I think it's something often with, but it's really hard to talk about that because that kind of shows our weaknesses. And I remember a moment, and God's had to do this many times to me. I'm not very good at learning the first time or the fifth time. But I remember looking at one of our children that I was working with in Melbourne, and I was struck with this moment, this really clear question of just, Bree, if I so value and love a child with a disability that so many people in this community see as having little purpose, if I so love someone who maybe cannot physically serve me, then how can you doubt the skills and abilities that I have given you to do? Because I love this boy and I equally love you, and equally I have a purpose for both of you. And I think that was a moment for me of kind of, seeing that God loves a purpose for all of us. And I guess that it's within our nature to question that, I think, and to look for more and to want more. But actually our identity in him and our trust in him and our willingness to serve him is our purpose. And yeah.
Bree, that's really deep. But it's also something that has changed your whole life trajectory. And we want to talk about sacrifice for mission. And you're sacrificing. What are some of the sacrifices you've had to make in your life to be where you are now? Do you think about that much? Like, do you think about your life and what a different trajectory you could have been on?
Sure. I think, I think it's such an interesting question because it I guess in my life now, the expectation probably culturally would be that I would have a really good job and that I would have probably my first house, maybe even looking to buy my second, and have maybe a husband and children. And I think that is a wonderful purpose in life. And I think that equally, missions, as equal to being in business, as equal to being a student, as equal to being a mother or a father, they're all equal and beautiful purposes in life. And I think for me, God knew that at a time in my life I needed, I guess, that identity in finishing a degree. I really originally wanted to be a doctor. And I think God really knew that was an idol in my life that I needed to give to him. And it was really painful to walk away from, I guess, what was expected of me. And my parents have been wonderful and have never placed that expectation on me. But personally, I think I always did. I think, in life, you grow up with this story of this is how your life will go. But I think in a lot of ways, I also really struggled with my own identity and my own value of my own life back in Melbourne. And I struggled a lot mentally with different things that really made me quite sad and quite I guess, lost in a lot of ways. And so I think in laying down that idol of wanting to have a university degree and this like beautiful life in Melbourne, really successful, I guess in some ways laying that down and giving that to God and maybe crucifying that is a good way to say it. That desire allowed me to be restored in other ways. And so I found so much more purpose in the work that I'm doing here, because I feel like, when God calls us, he equips us in different ways. And slowly he's had to equip me with this mental fortitude of trusting his story for me and trusting his truth in my life, and trusting that maybe that doesn't look like the formula that I was expecting when I was younger. Equally, I really miss my family a lot, and I miss my people, especially at Q. I miss very much the ease of living in a Western country and not being, I guess, stared at or looked at a lot. And I miss the naivety that I had in seeing the world in one way. And so in some ways those have been the hardest sacrifices for me, is seeing men in a different setting and seeing that the world is not, a life in Melbourne, which is one way, and neither is good or bad, but they're both different. And to see suffering in a new light and to have visual images of suffering that I know the people that have gone through that has been something that I've had to walk through with God. And that has been something, I guess my naivety was something I didn't realize I had to sacrifice, but something that has, again, been restored in a new way of seeing how God redeems and seeing how God is building my relationship with my family, even from afar, in ways I couldn't have done if I lived in Australia. And so I think there's this beauty, just like the cross, of this sacrificing to lay down what we have and then being restored in new ways that we don't expect. And I'm very grateful that continues to do that in my life. But it's not easy.
That's a great mindset, and I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that.
So you went over to Uganda and you started Sunflower Ministries, and we briefly touched on that at the start. But I guess, what is Sunflower Ministries? And something that you could probably answer and touch on at the same time is, why are people valuable, and why start something like Sunflower Ministries?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a privilege to share about Sunflower. I think, I guess the most simple way, I could talk about it forever, but the most simple way to explain Sunflower Ministries is that our calling, the work that we do, is led as much as possible by God and his Spirit in our lives. And we have sort of a twofold, I guess, desire. And one is to love and empower women in our community, especially those who have been affected in some way by disability themselves or by a person with a disability, and to help them to see significance in themselves and significance in their journeys that have been somewhat challenging. And also, where it sort of all began was to just love and serve children with disabilities. And that is, it's such a wonderful privilege to be a part of something that started from a couple of us visiting a couple of kids in the village. And God really was the one that began this ministry. He was the one that literally laid a path for us to walk, to see a few children. And in many communities, somewhat even I think in the West, we see the value of a human being in what they can do. And that's not wrong. We all have gifts that we use and skills and talents that we have that God has given inside of us. But the real value that I believe God sees is in just the person being made in his image. And I love that throughout the Bible, we get little snippets of that God keeps reminding us and drawing us back to being fearfully and wonderfully made, being knitted together, being people that God have that he created for his own pleasure and his purposes. And I think that's where really we draw our strength from and visit our families. I have about 20 children we visit regularly, and we go and serve them just by sitting with them and talking to them and playing with them. And it's not at all about seeking anything from the children, but it's about sharing relationship with them, because our God is such a relational God. And yeah, it's been so cool to see when you start gifting someone who has been told their whole lives that they're not valuable, when you start gifting and empowering them with this knowledge that they are loved, this knowledge that they are made for a purpose, this knowledge that they are created intentionally by God, then something shifts and changes. And our women, a lot of them have spent a lot of time struggling because they have had a child with a disability, and the community has ostracized them or sort of told them that they're the reason, their sin is the reason why this child has a disability, and that this disability is a curse. And when a book in the Bible specifically, when a story specifically talks about that and specifically says, and it's either John 9 or Luke 9, and I quote it wrong every single time. So there's my weakness as a human being, not being able to remember the scripture I use literally on the weekly. When Jesus directly speaks about this boy, this man not being a curse or a reason for sin, but actually because God so loved him that he wanted his purpose, that his purpose was there within, in the tension of his weakness, in the tension of his disability. It is remarkable to see like the freedom that someone receives from actually hearing that they were intentionally made by God. And so that's the work that we do. It's by no ability or skill set of my own, but simply by God's word, we are led to share this with our people. And our women have taught me so much about strength and resilience and about sacrifice and about redemption. But our work really does come straight from the pages of that story. And oh man, what an incredible gift it is to see God move.
You were talking about the story where they want to blame the guy where he is sick because of his sin. But it's just a great story for exactly what you said. There are difficulties, and sometimes life isn't great, and there's no one to blame. It's just life. We're not perfect, especially physically, but you can see that story, the lived out difficulty of that. So that's a great story from the Bible to share.
Yeah, Bree, have you got any specific stories or inspiring stories that you would like to share with us from your time at Sunflower Ministries?
Yeah, sure. It's funny that you ask. Last week, one of our women, Peace, who I've been working with for 4 years now, Peace was trained as a community-based worker, which is someone who basically has lay skills in helping people with disabilities. She had a brother who had a disability, and he passed away about 5 years ago. And her family really suffered from the community's, impression of or belief about a child with a disability. And therefore, her and her family, even though they were really well known and respected in the community, really struggled with, just this like constant echo of the fact that God didn't love them because they had this child, from both the church here and also the community around them. And Peace has worked alongside myself and a bunch of the women for 4 years now, and she visits our kids weekly. And we're developing like a training for our caregivers to actually really intentionally teach them about what the Bible says about disability, but also about how to practically care for their children. And in our team meeting last week, Peace was sharing this training, and she was actually sharing about the story of David and Mephibosheth. I hope I've said that right, because I say it wrong every time. But this story of King David, God's anointed king, inviting Mephibosheth, his enemy's grandson, into his house and inviting him to eat with him. And this is a story that's greatly impactful in this culture, because eating with someone and inviting them into your home, it kind of equals acceptance, and it speaks a lot about the love that you have for someone by inviting them into your home. And Mephibosheth actually has a disability. They say he was lame, and it didn't happen straight away at birth, but it happened as a result of an accident. And we kind of aligned that story with this story from John 9, who this man was created with blindness. And Peace she broke down, and she's not an easy woman to crack. And she just kind of shared how much God had spoken to her because of these stories, and seeing this kind of alignment of God's purpose in his people, even though they looked different, or maybe the rest of the community didn't love them. And she was radiating so much with this freedom of finally understanding why her brother had a disability, or finally being able to grapple with a loving God who also created her brother, and as a result they suffered. And I think that is so greatly impactful, because for all of us, the story of how we understand God and the story of how we grapple with suffering that God doesn't shy away from is so impactful, because we each have to come at it in a place of vulnerability and trust to God. And Peace's trust in him at that moment was so raw and so beautiful. And to be able to see just God showing her his love for her, and giving her a reason for some of the challenges that she's faced, and drawing her near, was so beautiful and so tangible in that moment. And I'm so grateful to have seen that. And, Peace was never part of the plan of Sunflower. The plan was to love children with disabilities. And so we go out and we do all these wonderful things for them. But to see how God would transform the life of one of the women that works for us, and to see his plan and his purpose in meeting every single person in the way that they need to be met, is so much more a testimony of who he is, and who, I guess, like the fact that he doesn't work on our time scale or our plan. And I'm so grateful to have seen kind of her deepening her relationship with God. And, we still struggle, and we still have days where our children aren't cared for the way that we want, but to see how God is meeting each of the staff, and to see how he's meeting each of our children, is so encouraging. And proof that he is in the midst of it, which is cool.
That is so good. Tell me, Bree, where is God now? Like, is there something you're reading at the moment that's striking you? Like, what is God saying to you at the moment, even about you, even in your own personal devotions? I mean, what is he teaching you?
Yeah, what a wonderful question, and what a tough question to answer. I think he's been teaching me somewhat about wilderness, in fact. And I've been reading a lot of the book of Exodus in the Bible that talks a lot about the Israelites coming out of oppression in Egypt. God has done this by granting them the ability to walk through the Red Sea, and then they erect these stones of remembrance to be reminded of God's power. And then they're in the wilderness and they end up there for 40 years. And I have been reading this over and over and over again to just kind of, I guess, bring about a better understanding of God's presence in times in our lives where we're really struggling, maybe with something. And me personally, I've journeyed through seeing one of our children pass away recently, and a few other things that have been really hard for my heart to kind of work through. And alongside that, I've been reading a book called Adam. I think it's Adam, God's Son. It's by Henry Nouwen or Newen, who is an incredible theologian and thinker, or was. And he talks about the value of who people are, and he has quite a few wonderful books. But I've been learning so much about God's presence in times when we're just not feeling the joy that the Bible talks about. And I guess kind of grappling with and sitting with God in the space of the now but not yet, and the here but the here which is good but not perfect, and the yet to come which is beautiful and perfect, and the hope that we have even in the struggle and even in the hardship. And it's amazing to see his faithfulness through it all. And so yeah, it's this challenging tension that I don't understand, that I'm still searching for. And I guess I've been struggling with that recently in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Such a great answer, Bree, and time has gone really quick and we're running out of time. But I did want to ask you, if people wanted to support you, can we just Google Sunflower Ministries? If people are listening to this pod and want to financially support you, how could they do that?
Yeah, for sure. You can check us out on our website, Sunflower Ministries Uganda. We're also on Instagram and Facebook under those names as well. I think it's actually just Sunflower Ministries, all the socials. And Pioneers is through who support me as well, and who have been an amazing encouragement to me personally as a supported worker. And so you can also go via their website. So thank you guys so much for just being willing to ask questions and helping me think through these things as well. And it's a privilege to share in a space where, you know, Q was a big part of my story. And I'm so grateful for the Q community, both then and also now. And so grateful for the way that you guys prayerfully and financially support me as a cross-cultural worker and the work that we're doing. So I'm so grateful for all of your work and support. So thanks.
That is no worries at all, Bree. It's been so great having you, and there's definitely a reason why we were both excited to get you on, and you've spoken so much wisdom, and hopefully people come away feeling really encouraged by your story and seeing what God has done and is continuing to do in your life. Yeah, God bless you, Bree.
Thanks, guys.
The Audience of One podcast is hosted by Pastor Mark Edwards and Regan Smith, and is produced by the Q Baptist Church. This episode is recorded and edited by the great Rob Hamlin.